All right, my clock says 6:02, so let's get underway. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Frank Gertner, the Director for Federal and Veteran Affairs here at Maryland Smith. And welcome. This is actually our 11th Veteran Transition Panel, which is pretty awesome to say. This one is going to be on the business of networking, which is an exploration of how to get past just networking to meet new people and into planning, partnering, and ultimately parsing your networking activities for measurable impact in business. Before we get into that, though, let's take our standard moment for brothers and sisters in uniform service who can't be with us because they're deployed to keep America secure, partnered, prepared, and healthy. Awesome. Thanks. Second, I'd like to extend a welcome to some invited partners today. If you're here, thanks to our relationship with the Alliance of Veterans affiliated with Big Ten Business Schools, 4Block, Corporate Gray, Veteran Business Outreach Center for the Mid-Atlantic, Stars and Stripes, or our newest partner, I need to add their logo, Service to Schools. We're thrilled to have you. And I also want to give a shout out to our corporate sponsor, Northrop Grumman. Much of what we do at Smith wouldn't be possible without them. Third, a little bit of context around this event. Our vet transition panels are part of Maryland Smith's initiative for veteran lifelong leadership. And that's our public-private platform to promote vets as strategic assets for a united economy. They support one of our three missions in the initiative, which is to enhance our collective and individual vet present value. So drop me a line. You can see at the bottom there the email if you want to learn more. Okay. Next, some admin items as we get our e-forum underway. Please mute your mics unless you are speaking. Also note that this session is recorded and will be posted to platforms that allow access by Maryland students, alumni, and partners. So your participation from this point on implies consent, and I also ask you to keep questions and answers professional to limit the amount of editing that I need to do before we post it to those public platforms. So getting into it here, this is our agenda for today. We're going to start off just to limber up and get you engaged with a pop quiz about veteran hiring and networking. Then we'll go into a very short discussion of some themes to kind of set the scene for our discussion. Then I'm excited to introduce our panel of experts in networking. Honestly, these three folks are, when I think of people who did networking right and continue to do networking right, Jim, Abby, and Brandon are the first three people that come to mind. So I'm excited that you get to hear from them. And finally, we'll wrap up with opportunities for you to ask questions and for them to answer or for us to answer among each other, share best practices in networking. So with that, I turn the controls over to Hugh Rainey, our Veteran Lifelong Leaders Fellow, to share the quiz. And as you do your quiz, we're going to give you 3 minutes. And we are also going to put you on, give you a little bit of flashback to holding with Sato for your last set of DTS orders.
Very painless, guys. Don't worry. About 9 questions, so we'll go ahead and get this started then. Well, I hope we didn't give anybody a PTSD episode listening to that hold music. I was definitely fighting some demons there, but we'll go ahead and go through this poll here. So, question one, 50% of you thought the answer was B, but the answer is actually A. 80% of jobs are not listed on job boards. So, really going to address the hidden market in terms of job search. Going on to question two, the majority of you said that 61% said that what percentage of jobs, of those percentage of jobs not listed, how many resumes does a single job posting receive? The answer is 250. A lot of stuff there. So true or false? Uh, okay. Me and Frank got to get synced up here. Yeah, of those 250, 4 to 6 applicants will get an interview. So it's very difficult to sift through the mountain of stuff there. Moving on to question number three, true or false, vets are less likely to take a step back in seniority. That answer is false. Vets are 70% more likely to take a step back. The temptation is real. Myself, seeing the amount of people that are recruiting for entry-level positions here at the Smith Business School. Moving on to question four. Of the following top U.S. industries, which are more likely to hire vets than non-vets? The answer is aviation, consulting, IT, and utilities. Among more likely to recruit, we've got accounting, banking, civil engineering, all the ones down on that list. So there's the people are out there. It's just a matter of how to find them. So moving on to number five, how many veterans transition from full-time military service each year in the U.S.? We got about 250,000 each year, according to the reliable va.gov. Moving on to number six, there are 16.2 million veterans in the U.S. and 362,000 in Maryland. So the community is strong. Moving on to number seven, veterans are more likely than non-veterans to be promoted into a leadership role within 3 years. That answer is true. We are 39% more likely than non-veterans to move into a leadership role. And that's just because of, the experience and the training that we have over the rest of the people in the business world. Moving on to the next question, number eight. 1 to 3 years after separation, veteran earnings grew an average of 25%. That was by the Rand Research Center, and just kind of shows the resiliency and hard work ethic that we have over everyone else. Moving on to our last question, question number 9. What percent of current Fortune 500 CEOs are veterans? The answer is 8%. So to kind of sum up all of those statistics, to kind of give you some common themes there, the atmosphere for vets looking for jobs is that the jobs out there, they're not always visible, they're not always listed. It's always going to be competitive in this ever-changing market. However, our community is strong. We are not alone. We're all out there in it together. And once we get our foot in the door, we tend to succeed more once we finally get hired, and we tend to climb the ladder once we make it there, and we can find partners in the highest places. It's just a matter of putting in the effort to find them and cultivating the relationships and maintaining them. And that's kind of going to be the common theme of this panel. And without further ado, I'll hand it back over to Frank.
Awesome. Thanks, Hugh. Okay, so I'm going to take you through just some quick slides to set the scene for our panel. And what we're going to talk about is network planning, and what I like to talk about as understanding where your current network center of gravity is. Second, network partnering. So thinking through who can help you move that center of gravity or shift that center of gravity over time, perhaps from the industry you're leaving, which in many cases will be the military or the defense or government sector, into or towards the industry that you're looking to network into or be hired into. And finally, network parsing. So how do you sift through the thousands, hundreds, oftentimes thousands of contacts that you end up accumulating over the course of a networking season and start to understand which ones of them can actually work for you right? And start to deliver measurable impact. So first off, in network planning, it's important to understand that the further along you are in the career, likely the further you may be away from trying to bridge across the military civil employment divide. And so your networking efforts and duration may actually be quite a bit longer and, need more bridges across or spans across the bridge if you're closer to, say, the 30-year mark in your career than if you're closer to the 5 or 10-year mark of your career. But you need to think about where are you trying to go, right? Because it also may not be that much of a span if you are looking to go from the military to the public sector versus if you're trying to go from the military to, say, private sector investment banking, in which case you're going to need to have quite a long and pretty elaborate plan to get there. The first place I would recommend starting is trying to chart where your current network is and where your center of gravity is in that network. So this is just something that, one tool that you can use. Actually, this is my network right now. And you can see that I'm, kind of, my center of gravity is a little bit more towards business and military than it is in education. But interestingly, I'll tell you, 5 years ago, when I was just exiting the military, that blue would have been over 50%. And business would have been closer to the green in education. And so it's taken me a lot of work to move my center of gravity to where it is today. And one place to start in generating that chart, in fact, how did I generate that chart? Just go to your LinkedIn profile, right? Go to filter, go to your contacts or your network. If you go to searching your people and you filter by industry, it'll show you how many results you have. Figure out the percentage or the percentage of those results over your current network, right? And you have a percentage. And very quickly, you throw that into an Excel spreadsheet, you get a nice pie chart, and you can understand where the distribution of your current network is and ask yourself, is that where I want it to be? Is that helping me get to where I need to be, on that bridge or in your hiring goals? Next, you need to ask who can help you once you've determined, where your network is and where you want it to go or where you need the center of gravity to be. You need to start to ask yourself who can help you shift that center of gravity. And sometimes that means thinking about things differently. Sometimes it means making new contacts. And so hopefully within your current network, or as you grow your network, you're thinking about who your coaches are, right? Who the people are who are able to help you with the tactics, techniques, and procedures and selling your strengths. Who your mentors are, so who the people are in that new field that are going to give you really the informational, understanding that you need to be able to speak like a pro and understand how to sell yourself as a leader. And then finally, who are your sponsors, right? So the sponsors are the folks that not only are going to give you advice, but they're actually going to help open doors for you, secure interviews, lead you into that 80% of the job market that may not be posted actually, because they're the ones who know the leaders who are actually driving that market. How do you do that, or how do you start to chart that? One place to start is your professional reference sheet, right? Hopefully you have like a running sheet of professional references that you're using in your applications. Start to divvy it out according to what your industries are that you're targeting or that you're coming from, right? And then start to, as you build your network of coaches and sponsors and mentors, make sure that you have them documented on your professional reference sheet so that as soon as you get an application in, you can flow them right through to your top 3 references and your application is humming. Finally, you need to start networking, right? You need to get out there. But one thing I want to impress on you, or at least that I've learned, is that networking alone, right? Just being an extrovert and meeting a bunch of people, it's not enough. At some point, you got to start to filter that network and target your attention and your time according to where you're trying to go, according to your goals. Now, this is a former pilot. I really like knee boards. This is a knee board I came up with. Actually, I pulled it together from some mentors that I had, and then redesigned it myself. But this is what I used in my transition. I still use it today. The front side is a way for me to delineate my goals, right? I like to cook, so I think about what are the top what are the top 2 to 3 things that I want on my front burner? What are the things I want on the back burner? And what do I have in the oven over time, right? And then on the back side of the knee board, or on the second sheet of the knee board, I try to parse out my network, right? To delineate where I'm going to target my attention over the next weeks or months, right? So I start with just kind of scratching this out on paper. Every week I take it out and try to reorient, right? What are the top 2 to 3 goals for my week that are on my front burner? What are the 1 to 2 goals that I have for the month, right? Longer term goals. I'm just tending to them every once in a while, every couple days. And then what's in the oven? What's my stretch goal for the year? And then I take that and I look on the backside and I say, okay, let me think about my current network of people, right? That I have around me or that I have on my reference sheet. Who do I need to refresh my conversations with, daily or weekly? Who do I know who I need to keep up with? Then who do I need to kind of up my game with? Who am I surging towards? Who do I know who I need to know better? Then I take the third quadrant and say, who do I know, but I don't really know, right? I know who they are, but I don't have a relationship with them. So I need to start a relationship with them. I know them, but they need to know me. And then the final bin, which is really your gap analysis, is where are there people I know who I need to know, but I don't know them yet, right? So I need to reach out to people, or I need to join clubs or join platforms to get to know new people in the new industry or in a new company. I don't know who they are yet, but at some point they're going to be names that I'm going to want to put into one of the other bins that I have on this in a future week or a future month. So those are some of the things that I do. You don't have to adopt them, but if you want any of these, reach out to me. I'm happy to share the templates with them. You can go and have fun with them or change them up yourself, and then come back and tell us, how they worked out for you when you're successful, like the next 3 people I'm going to talk to or introduce. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce actually our 3 panelists. They are all Smith MBA grads, happily. So Abby Malcho is a Navy vet, senior business development manager at Amazon, and a Smith MBA from 2017. Jim Vika is also a Navy vet, so go Navy. He's the vice president of WesBanco, which is spelled wrong on this slide. I apologize to Jim and WesBanco, because despite the fact that they are one of the largest or fastest growing regional banks in the country, I still spelled their name wrong. So I apologize for that. It should be BANCO, but he's a Smith MBA 2021. And finally, Brandon Owens, Marine vet, our newest MBA, just from last year, senior consultant at Deloitte. So with that, I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen because we're going to get into the discussion with these fine experts. And hopefully you are not seeing my messy screen behind those slides. But I'd like to start with you, Abby, if I can, and just, you did an amazing job coming out of the MBA at Smith. It was actually a part-time MBA, so you weren't even full-time in the MBA program. And you really nationalized your network, not only in veteran advocacy, but also in business. And ultimately ended up landing jobs on the complete other side of the country, right? With Intel and then Amazon. And then you ended up moving back from California and Washington uh, to the East Coast. And so you've kind of had to navigate your network across the entire country. So I'd love to just hear from you, how did you do that? What tools did you use?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Yeah, I am a natural extrovert, so I will say that I love to talk and meet people. So that's a disclaimer I already have. No, so I was very intentional with my MBA. I was working as a federal civilian at the time when I was in my MBA program, and I knew that I wanted to leverage my MBA to transition industries, specifically the tech industry. So what I did was I connected every job I got since both at Intel and Amazon has been through my network. I didn't really apply for the job. It's all been through people that I knew. So what I did was I began by attending all of the MBA conferences in grad school. And I had a very strategic approach with the MBA conferences. I specifically attended MBA veterans. So if you're an MBA student and a veteran, which hopefully you are, I highly recommend the MBA veteran conference. And what I did there was I looked to see what companies were going to be at that conference. Then I looked at their job boards to see what type of jobs they were hiring for at that conference. I applied to those before attending the conference so that I had all these interviews scheduled when I was at the conference, and I directly connected with every single recruiter by sending them a follow-up message and connecting with them on LinkedIn, which, by the way, everyone here should be connecting with us on LinkedIn. So from there, I actually met someone at the conference who worked at Intel. I wasn't even considering Intel as an employer, and basically convinced him right on the spot that he should interview me given my background in supply chain and given the fact that they were hiring for a supply chain role. So I was pretty smart about that because I knew what my capability was in the Navy. My background in the Navy was supply chain. So I used my background in the Navy and supply chain to get my first role post MBA, but I no longer work in supply chain whatsoever. So I've continued to transition after that role at Intel. And so I negotiated with him, and then he basically offered me the job. So it was great. And then after Intel, what I really do is I reach out to people, both Navy connections and alumni connections, and I really just set up informational conversations. I think it's really important to consider the culture of a company before you ever even apply, because why waste your time working for a company that's not going to be a cultural fit for you? You're going to be miserable. So I do a lot of legwork on the front end to see what type of company, what type of industry would really keep me motivated and interested at work, because I get bored very easily. So I need an employer, I need a role that's going to keep me always challenged. Once I align and find out what those what industries and companies are, then I reach out to people I know and say, hey, would you be willing to talk about your experience at the company with me? I never ask them for a referral. I never ask them to put me up for a job. I just want to know what their culture, what their experience working for the company is like. And that's literally how I got my job at Amazon. And the person who I reached out to at Amazon actually ended up being one of the people who interviewed me, which is very rare considering that Amazon has like over 1 million employees. What are the odds of that? But he was a Navy veteran and he was working at Amazon and he was willing to have that conversation with me. So that's pretty much how I take my approach to networking.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you. And, you know, that is one thing that I hear often from folks is, you know, that tip that you never want to lead with a job ask, right? And that's not just protocol, right? It's just that, you know, the most important thing uncovering that hidden job market is understanding the culture and the current activities of the company, the business of the company, right? It's not just whether or not there's a job available. Because oftentimes if you ask them if there's a job available, they'll just go to their job site and look for it and send it to you. And you've gotten a lead, but it's not a helpful lead, right? Because you could have gotten that yourself, and there's a chance they don't know anything about the job they just forwarded you. They're just doing it just to feel good about saying yes to your ask. Okay, Jim, over to you. So you came out of the Navy, you know, you were, you know, we didn't talk about your Navy background, but you were a nuclear surface warfare officer, right? So you were sitting in the bowels of Navy aircraft carriers, watching dials and keeping the nuclear reactor safely operating. And then you pivoted from there into commercial banking, and now, as we mentioned, being a VP of one of the fastest growing regional banks in the country. So, you know, how did you do that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Frank. And sorry, I'm a little distracted. I can hear my wife is yelling at the kids in the background, so sorry if you hear me laughing. You know, good luck to her. Yeah, no, so it's actually interesting when you look at nuclear power and banking, it's very similar, right? It's all about risk mitigation and risk management. But to convince somebody at a bank that that's the truth is a pretty big long shot right there. So I wrote down a few ideas here, and one of the big things is you need to find a good insider. They don't need to be a director or some really important person. They just need to be somebody who's going to advocate for you. So when I left Merrill, Smith, I went to M&T, which is one of the super regionals out of New York. And I was really lucky to have somebody internally who advocated for me and told everybody how, hey, you got to talk to this guy. He's smart. He was a nuke. This guy, I think this guy liked that I was the nuke more than I liked being a nuke. But that's really, really important, is to find an insider advocate. And I see it in sales today, is that if there's not somebody pushing for you, it's really hard to get anything done. So one of the things that I was thinking about while we were going through these questions is that, you never want to ask anybody for a job, but one of the things you could ask at the end of a conversation that I always thought was interesting is, how can I help you? And 90% of the time, whenever I ask somebody this question, they would always say, there's nothing I think you can do for me right now. But a lot of times what it would do is prompt them to say to you, well, how can I help you? And this is actually how I landed my job at M&T. Was the guy said, how can I help you? And I said, I really want an internship with you guys. And that started everything right there. And so that's how I got into banking, eventually led me to full time, eventually got me in at WesBanco. When I think about networking, I think about it from a relationship standpoint. So a lot of times, especially in an MBA program, it's going to be very transactional, right? You're going to call somebody, you're looking for a job, they know you're looking for a job. You need help from them, they know you need help from them. As you break through that first job, though, everything that you should be doing after that is going to be very relationship oriented. So I have a tool that I use. We call them centers of influence in banking, as opposed to like your gravity. And those are people who have connections all over the place. And so we use a tool here where if you're not in front of them every 60 to 90 days, you're out of sight, out of mind. And so that was one of the tricks I used to get into M&T as well, is that I just was constantly trying to be in front of somebody. And it was always somebody new. And then I'd come back and, report back like, hey, I got in front of, Ryan, and Ryan got me in front of this person. So I was always trying to touch base with them and find excuses. And it was always simple things, a little email, a quick phone call, or a text. But it was important to always have that touch point and build that relationship, because when you can get past the transactional point, it just makes things very easy. And to Abby's point, I remember walking into my interview with M&T, and the 4 people who interviewed me, I'd already gotten lunch with them. I'd already gotten coffee with them. We were on a first name basis, and it made the interview so simple. And then the last thing I want to point out is people do business with people they like. So if you can find a commonality with somebody, the obvious one here is, being a veteran or being in the military. But I think there's so much more to that, right? When I look at myself, I tried to play hockey for 2 years. I was terrible. I gave up on that. But you know how much business I generated from playing hockey? Like a lot. Here in Maryland, you can tell I'm a sports fan. Lacrosse is king, right? I've generated 2 business opportunities from being my 6-year-old son's lacrosse coach. So finding that commonality with somebody makes it very easy to do business with them. And it's not like I was seeking business when I was out there playing a sport, but it just made it much easier. And so I would really try to harp on everybody on this call, is try to find that one piece of connection. And it doesn't have to be the military. Sometimes that's the obvious one, but if you can find that connection, people will go above and beyond for you if they like you as a person.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jim. Awesome advice. It's interesting. That's one reason why I think it's important to have on your resume your community affiliations, and also like if you have volunteering or you do other things, because oftentimes in interviews that'll actually be the hook that pulls out some personal questions that are actually very memorable, actually make you the most memorable. So awesome. Thanks for that, Jim. Okay, on to Brandon. So you entered, you went from being a Marine to, working in tech in Deloitte, and you had to pass through Microsoft along the way. So how has networking helped you navigate what's been kind of an uncertain tech market this last couple of years?
Yeah, no, fun question. So kind of it's almost a constant theme that both Abby and Jim mentioned, right? It's nothing but coming off of those networks. So when it came to my first opportunity to join Microsoft, right? So I, like Abby, came from a supply chain background in the Marines, And just, it was really a lot of exposure in my last unit that made me want to pursue a career in tech. That before, just like Abby, I went to the Smith Vet conference, and before that conference, I also looked at who was attending, applied to those roles for those companies in which I was interested in, and I spent that entire conference really trying to get to know people as opposed to really just sitting there throughout all the lectures, right? And getting to know those recruiters. And it was one of those recruiters at Microsoft. After a conversation I had with him, he let me know that there was certain terms and keywords for the roles that I was looking for in the career that I was looking to do inside of Microsoft, right? So it was just through that normal, like that conversation with him, that I learned that simply typing in, marketing manager or, product manager isn't necessarily going to find you the role that you're looking for, but that conversation with somebody who is that insider, who knows how the company is structured and works in that space, they might actually help you when it comes to searching opportunities by key name. So when it came to that internship, I was extremely extroverted. I met with every manager on my team and all the adjacent teams just to get an understanding of how the company operates and how everything relates to one another, right? They already knew I was an intern. I wasn't necessarily looking for a job on their team, but I was still interested in what their team did, right? Now I'll kind of circle back to that and why that worked out for me, kind of to where I'm at. And then when I pivoted to Deloitte, that was using my network, both former vets that I served with and other classmates, ones that were either a year ahead of me while I was in B school or who had previously graduated before me. And I reached out to them, and similar to what the previous two speakers have said, don't just reach out asking for a job. I just wanted to know, what is a job of a consultant in Deloitte? Like, we have these, terms, we have these titles, but nobody really knows what it is, especially if you're pivoting from the military, right? You hear consultant and you're like, okay, I don't know, like structures and formats and, PowerPoints, but nobody really understands what that is and how it can differ from role to role and for your clients, right? So it was through conversations that I was able to kind of understand better what opportunities existed at the firm. And so when I applied to my current role at Deloitte, I already had an understanding of exactly what it was I was applying for, what the client was asking for the account that I was being hired for. So really it started with relationships. And then I think both Abby and Jim alluded to this. It's really just watering that relationship. So even though, I ended my time at Microsoft, even though I, took an opportunity at Deloitte, I still keep in contact with managers at Microsoft, with former interns who are now full-time employees, and to include the directors who I didn't even work with at Microsoft, but who I met in person while I was there, right? And it was through that they're still reaching out to me. And they're like, hey, we have some roles coming up. Are you interested? We think this will be a good fit, because they already know, one, what my work ethic is. They already know that, it was a good culture fit for the company itself. And two, just staying in contact with them. They know that I'm always, kind of interested in that perfect fit for what I'm trying to do with my career. And so one thing I just want to call out that, really, I think it was well said, it was Abby, right? Like, you took your initial role in supply chain and then you pivoted out of that. And I think that's very important for everybody to kind of take away. You don't need to find that perfect role the moment you are transitioning from active duty or the reserves or B school, right? But you can use that first opportunity with that company as a foot in the door to pivot. It's a lot easier, that I've found, to pivot once you're inside a company than trying to completely pivot as you're trying to enter a company with no, if we're being honest, with no background in that field, right? So don't be afraid to kind of plan out your career path as you make this transition. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a year. Allow yourself the time and the flexibility to learn as you're kind of transitioning the space.
That's great. Thanks, Brandon. It's funny, a couple things that that came to mind as I've kind of started to be on the networked end and the hiring end of the equation. And two things really resonated. One is that most people really, not everyone likes to talk about their company, but pretty much everyone likes to talk about themselves and their career and their day. And so that's one way that you can, find your way into relationships, is ask people about their normal day, or how, you know, where they want to go in their career and how they got to where they are. And that sometimes can tease out discussions about the company without asking them explicitly about like, so tell me about Microsoft and where they're going and if you have any jobs, right? And then the second thing that I think that that resonated was, now that I'm, you know, have been on the end of the hiring end, you know, a number of times, is that there's always one question in the back of everyone's mind at a hiring table that they don't ask explicitly, but that is, would I want to actually work with this person every day? Right. And in a way, when you're networking, that's actually the question you're answering more than anything, is that they want to work with you. So, right. Well, so last round of questions here before we open up the Q&A. Obviously, a lot of networking now is happening in the digital space, either by Zoom, live, right, or you know, asynchronously, what we'd call it, you know, in LinkedIn or social networking, things like that. So, you know, I'd love to ask that question from each of our panelists. How do you balance sort of the digital networking with the in-person networking? What tools do you use, and how do you keep them synced up? So Brandon, can we start with you?
Yeah, of course. Great question. So I take a lot of time to kind of cultivate my online, I don't want to say persona, but presence, right? Because that is ultimately how most are going to get their first experience or their first impression of me, right? So I take time to make sure that my LinkedIn reflects not only my accomplishments, but also where I'm trying to go with my career. So one of the things that I like to kind of just, it's the way I looked at LinkedIn. It shouldn't just be, you know, Brandon's greatest hits, right? It should also tell a perspective, either colleague or employer, like, hey, this is how Brandon could be a good fit for my company or for this role, because, you know, he has background in whatever, supply chain or risk management, or even tech consulting or product development and, you know, building, right? So I would first just say, don't just simply use LinkedIn as, you know, your greatest hits, but use it as a vehicle to convey what you can bring to a new employer. The second thing is, when it comes to networking and digital, like, I email a lot of both former colleagues, folks who have, you know, found my name through a friend of a friend. Hey, you know, Brandon's transitioned. He's, you know, finished his MBA. You should reach out to him. Right. And I take time to either just pick up the phone and speak with people, or have that email. And the one thing that I advise everybody, and that is because it was the same advice that was given to me, is that, like, you have to take time to give yourself, and here's the only militarism is I'm, you know, going to throw in, like a wire brush scrub, right? Like, you need to demilitarize yourself just a little bit, because what is it, like 6% of the entire population of the US are vets. So the overwhelming majority of those who are going to be employers just don't have exposure to it. So they're not going to necessarily understand everything that we have experienced and what we bring to the table, but they will understand it if we translate that into terms and phrases and certifications and just accomplishments that they're familiar with, right? So as you know, as we start to network with individuals, make sure that we are slowly, like, you know, moving away from the military terms, because folks sometimes won't even ask what that is, because they're either shy, embarrassed, or they're just going to nod their head. They're like, yeah, I heard that on the news or Call of Duty, right? So taking time to really translate what you've done is going to help as we try to, again, like, initiate these conversations online, because, again, that's how most people are going to get their first impression of you.
That's great. Jim, thoughts from you?
Frank, I'm going to be a little contrarian because I'm terrible at digital. And because I work in an industry that's hyper regional. I mean, you would be amazed at how powerful it is when you can tell someone, oh, I'm in Annapolis, I'm in your backyard. It matters to people quite a bit in banking, at least on the commercial side. So a couple of thoughts that's non-digital. One is the power of a written note. You can write about 3 sentences in a little postcard. And I know this because when we went and visited my son's school, someone sent me that postcard and it literally just said, hey, thanks for visiting. Can't wait to see you guys again. And I was like, man, that's awesome. And so I've done that ever since we got that card. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from that. So one, I think that's huge. The other is just a saying that we have, and I'm sorry that I'm not answering your digital question. I promise it's because I'm just not good at it.
Actually,
Um,
you are.
All right, here it goes. Ready? This is a saying we always have. Never email if you can call, and never call if you can see him in person. So when you're out networking, if you just shoot me an email when you could have called me, that phone call will go a lot further. And if we have a chance to actually sit down and shake hands and break bread, that's way more significant to me than Zoom would be. Now, of course, if you live in California, then we can't do that. But if you're 30 minutes away and we can find 30 minutes to sit down for coffee, that's a pretty powerful 30 minutes, and I think goes a lot further than like Zoom or Teams would take you.
No, that's awesome. And actually, what I have defaulted to is that oftentimes scheduling an in-person meeting, it can be an anchor point for you to have conversations around that, right? So sometimes that can be a forcing function for you to shift that center of gravity, get people on your schedule that you're meeting with or you're calling that are in the industry you're trying to go towards. And then that will force you to have other communications, sometimes email communications or calls with that person before and after, right? That pulls you, not only pulls your network, but actually pulls your activity and your thinking towards where you need to go. So that's awesome. All right, over to you, Abby. Close us out.
Yeah, I'm like Jim. I prefer more in person. However, I'm going to plus one on Brandon's comment on the importance of your brand. I do think when you choose to engage in a platform like LinkedIn, it's very important that you're creating content. Your messaging is consistent with who your brand is because people are really watching you there. So, for example, I'm not just going to post randomly once every 2 years and say, "Hey, I started a new job." No, I'm going to be pretty consistent with my communication, knowing that I have a target audience in mind when I'm communicating via LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn more for my business customer, more for my personal brand, my brand at Amazon, more than I use it for my network. However, I do look for connections, common connections on LinkedIn if there is people I'm interested in discussing at various industries or companies. Right now, I'm not really looking for a job, but again, LinkedIn's more for informational. And if there is the opportunity to meet in person, I'm absolutely all for that. Now, I do a lot of hiring at Amazon, and I will say people message me all the time saying, "Hey, I'm really interested in Amazon," or "I applied for this job." And when they send me that message on LinkedIn, I'm going to ignore it, right? If you're not coming, sending me a message that says, "I'm really interested in learning more about you and your work at Amazon. Is it possible to schedule a call?" But if you're just saying, "Here's a job that I applied to, help me out," I'm not going to respond to that message. So I do think that you do need to be a little aware in how you're messaging your brand on social media for sure.
Yeah, oh, that's great advice. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that because one thing I think sometimes people don't appreciate, especially like vets who are just getting out, is that you working at Amazon or you working at Deloitte or you working at WesBanco or M&T before that, like once you're close to jobs, you start getting pummeled with people asking you for jobs. And, I think vets have to appreciate the fact that there are 249,000 other transitioning vets around them and, 16 million other veterans, right? And so, how do you stand out from that crowd, right? How do you make it more personal than the 249,000 others that are just writing emails or LinkedIn messages? So, well, great advice, man. That was a great round of answers. So thank you all. We're going to open it up now for questions from the field. So if you do have a question for any of our panelists or you have thoughts on best practices you've devised yourself in networking, please feel free to either shoot a message in chat and we'll read it out or raise your hand and we're happy to have you ask it live.
I forgot to add one more point, Frank, while we're
Sure.
waiting for questions. You should look at everyone you meet as a possible connection. Not to be Machiavellian too much, but what can they do for me and what can I do for them, right? So if I meet someone at any type of event, and I'm like, "Hey, this is a really cool person," I'm going to connect with them, but it's always going to be someone that I connect with in person first. I'm not just going to randomly send connection requests to people. So everyone's a possible connection.
Okay, we got some questions flowing in here. Do you want to call on folks?
Sure. Well, first question from Robert Moore. Robert Moore, feel free to take yourself off and mute if you'd like to stay quiet, though I can just read it out. Okay. Robert Moore's question was, what do you recommend for those whom transition from cleared to uncleared tech roles, effectively networking and adapting their skills within the constraints of these environments?
Yeah, I can take that one because similar to you, Robert. So yeah, like I currently work in a cleared tech role right now. What I would say is that obviously there's a lot that you can't divulge, right? You can't discuss. However, there's a lot that you have experience in and a lot that you can bring to the table. So step one, I don't, I'm not sure what your role is, but a lot of tech, they follow a Kanban or a sprint kind of methodology in terms of the workflows and product development. Definitely emphasize your ability to work in that environment and scrums and in sprints, just because that's what the rest of the sector is used to. That's what they're familiar with, right? Also, a lot of time, at least what I'm seeing right now, is there's like three big words, phrases: AI, cloud, and quantum in certain environments, right? So seeing if you can tie your accomplishments or your current work into one of those in the uncleared space, right? Everybody right now is trying to optimize the back end to hang their products or their portfolio on a cloud environment. So if you understand the different benefits of various cloud technologies, that's one way that you can be really try to, sell yourself when it comes to networking, right? Because not everybody understands that. I will be the first one to admit I'm still learning every single day, that I still don't fully grasp everything that this cloud technology with the incorporation of AI really has to offer. So when you're having these conversations with folks, if you're able to come with that kind of background and knowledge, I think you'll be very successful, because as we are starting to hire and onboard more people for my team, that is the one thing that we have been looking for, is their understanding with cloud environments. And a lot of, I would say, two of them are coming from an uncleared space previously, but obviously now they're working in the cleared space. I hope that answers your question.
All right, we got enough time for a couple more questions here.
It's like we got a question from Jason Scott Barbier. For Abby specifically, how did you identify good versus bad cultures, and what questions did you ask when you were talking to these people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you can tell a lot about a person when you have a conversation with them. I'll give you a good example. When I was in my MBA program, an Amazon recruiter came to campus, and they were recruiting for an pathways program in the ops part of Amazon. And I met with the recruiter, and her eye was twitching, and it was right when the New York Times expose came out, and I was like, wow, her eye's twitching. She's she seems very stressed out right now. Amazon is not the company for me. This is not for me whatsoever. But I went ahead with the interview process anyway, and I realized during the interview process that was just not the right role for me. However, I really was wanting to work in tech. So what the questions I always ask people is, it depends on what you value more than other things. For some people, for example, work-life balance is very important. For me, what's really important is the ability to innovate and create. What I didn't like about the government was I felt stifled from a creative perspective. And in my role at Amazon, I get to create and innovate every single day. And I love to take risks. And that's another thing that Amazon embraces. It's a risk-taking culture. So for me, I think it's all a matter of what you value, what makes you happy in your job. I always recommend too taking the strengths test. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but we take it at Amazon all the time. The Strengths Finder test. It tells you a lot about what you enjoy, what makes you happy in your work, and you can look at the result of that strengths test to really help you identify what companies fit the culture you're looking for. And as we're talking, I'm going to find the specific link for you for that.
Yeah, it's the Gallup Strength Finder. And you can actually do one for free, you know, on their website, and then obviously you have to pay for the more in-depth ones. Awesome. All right. Oh, Mike McFadden. Mike, do you want to go ahead and take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Mike McFadden here. I had a question about for networking specifically, how do you get over the gap of like focusing on rank or grade, I should say? I found that, you know, I got out after 4 years of you know, junior enlisted service, but now I'm in a position where I'm doing consulting with data analytics at a manager level at my current place of employment. But when I go out and try to do networking to either, you know, try to engage with folks and like primarily it seems like kind of with officers too, at least like from, you know, a enlisted perspective, I have the years of experience in the current field now after making that transition of getting out and going back to school, using the GI Bill, bringing in that work ethic I brought from, you know, the aircraft carrier over to here. But I guess it's like there's still that social stigma I see with like even when we were on the boat for us Navy folks, that little divide. We are working for the same mission, but grade does, you know, putting that quantitative value of a person based on their grade seems to kind of like build a little bit of a barrier of not only just like shared experiences, but even perceptions of those experiences too. So I was kind of curious to see everyone on this panel's perspective about how you get over that gap, and you know, how do you actually try to have them hone in and focus in on what's currently happening versus you know, what may have happened in the past and that time in deference, if that makes sense.
That's a great question. One thing I will mention is that I do think it's industry specific, and you know, you're going to find a lot more sort of legacy rank holding and in the aerospace defense industry and the government than you are outside. And I'll actually ask Abby to comment on that because you were a reserve. Were you a chief at that point?
Yeah, I was active duty and then I went reserve. Yeah, I'm retired chief. Yeah, so I earned my paycheck, Frank. Yeah. He's absolutely right. It is industry specific. We don't look at your grade at all at Amazon. It's great to put a check in the box on, and I've reviewed thousands of resumes at Amazon. It's good to say, oh, I have military service, but please stay away from all that military lingo, the military acronyms, the pay grade. No one at Amazon or any tech company that I've worked at is going to know what that even means unless they're a veteran. And please keep in mind, I'm in an org of over 30,000 people, and I am the only vet in an org of over 30,000 people. So that means that most of the recruiters at Amazon likely don't have military service, right? So I just keep that in mind. And Amazon, it's nice to hire a vet. We do have veteran hiring targets, but we don't look at pay grade or anything like that whatsoever. We're looking more at your experience and your fit for the role.
Frank, you mind if I?
And that may even be different, like at AWS, right, where they probably have more military than they do at Amazon.
I would say at AWS, they're more looking for your DoD connections, not so much your pay grade.
Jim, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just appreciated the question because I find myself kind of falling into that trap too, where like if I see like a JO, I kind of give that person a pass of like, oh, well, you know, I know what their background is, you know. So Michael, I would argue one, now that you've been out for a little bit and have this manager experience, I think the longer you're out, the farther away you get from it. And so people, you know, like I would be less likely to focus in on that. I also think, you know, what Abby just did there was like really kind of funny and helpful. Like I earned my paycheck, you know, and it makes you laugh. And now suddenly like the ice is broken and you can move on. But I just appreciate your question because I find myself falling into that trap a lot when we're looking at like veteran resumes.
And then I would like to just, I'm sorry, Frank.
No, go ahead, Brandon.
I'll just offer a tip. Take it, leave it. It's up to you 100%. What I have found again, looking at, if you want to look at your kind of online brand, right? You don't necessarily need to, like, let's be honest, nobody on LinkedIn really cares if you're a sergeant or a gun, like a jet. Well, unless you're going into aerospace, they're going to care if you're a general because they're going to want to hire you, right? But like, nobody's really going to care what your rank was. They're going to care what you did, right? So lean forward with what you did, your job, especially if you're trying to either continue that in, outside of the military, or if you're trying to pivot. But I personally have not seen a need since transitioning to really like lean forward with my rank that I left with, or that I'm currently holding as a reservist, or anybody that I've worked with, right? And that also might be a hint, especially if you're looking to pivot into a different industry or company. That might also be a hint to what the culture is right there, because that might not be the fit if you're coming in and everybody's like, oh well, he's a sergeant, like, who cares? Like, it might not be a good fit. So maybe use that to your advantage, because if that's what you're receiving and that's what you're experiencing, then next, right? Because at the end of the day, they're going to be lucky to have you, because you just bring a lot of unique experiences that the average applicant candidate just does not have, thanks to your military experience. Doesn't matter what the rank was. So just food for thought. Take it, leave it.
I'll tell you, Brandon, one thing I will say is that, to segue on what you're saying, which is great. Sometimes I see enlisted, in particular junior enlisted transitioners, leaning back because of their rank. And I don't do that either, right? Don't self-categorize yourself. In fact, I'll tell you a story of one of our MBA grads just a couple of years ago set the record for, for salary increase through our MBA program. He did it by getting a job, so he was an E5 coming out of the Air Force. He got hired in the Goldman Sachs, over 120% salary increase. And his story is that he went, and it wasn't until halfway through his internship, he was surrounded throughout the internship, he was surrounded by other military, but it wasn't until halfway through the internship that they actually figured out that he was prior enlisted. Because they just were talking about their military experience and everything else. And he was, and it just never came up, and he never brought it up. Right. And then he came to find out that he was the first enlisted candidate that they had ever given an internship to. Right. They found that out late in his interview, and he was already secured for a job on the outside, on the end. So that doesn't mean to hide it. It just means that he networked himself as an individual, as a professional, as an MBA candidate, not as a former or transitioning E5 MBA candidate, right? So I think sometimes that's important to recognize, especially if you're going into an industry where rank really is completely irrelevant.
Yeah, plus 1,000 to that. And chances are, if I see a resume with someone who's prior enlisted, I'm going to interview them. So you never know who's going to be reviewing that resume. But yeah, don't let the enlisted thing ever stop you ever.
Awesome.
No, absolutely. I appreciate it. And thank you all for the clarifications.
Right. So I will give a plug to our next event, actually next Wednesday on the 6th of March. The candidate that I just mentioned, who's now an investment banking professional at Goldman Sachs, he's going to be down at our next event, actually on March 6th, and he's going to be talking about his networking experience. That event's going to be at the Army Navy Country Club, co-sponsored with Corporate Gray and MOA, and now the new Non-Commissioned Officers Association that we're developing a partnership with. So join us down there. You can check out our website, and that's going to take me into sort of our final set of slides as we wrap up here. So I want to first thank our panelists. Thank Jim, Abby, Brandon. Awesome advice. So it's always exciting to hear from you and to keep up with your careers. And we'll continue to have you back. But thanks for paying it forward. For our Smith vets and partners, as I mentioned, the recordings and the slides for this event, as well as all of our other initiative events, are posted to our Smith Vet group page on Terrapin Connects under resources. They are also posted on our Initiative for Veteran Lifelong Leadership website. So you can go to go.umd.edu IVL2, or you can capture this this QR code, and you'll see this event eventually posted there, transcript it, and you can go back and reference it and share it with your friends if you or other transitioners as you go. Finally, as always, I like to sign off with a salute to our old line legacy that all vets affiliated with Maryland, including you, now share. It's a legacy that was born August 1776 at the Battle of Brooklyn, when less than 400 Maryland volunteer citizen soldiers held off more than 2,000 British Army regulars to save the Continental Army from a very, very early defeat. Less than a dozen of them survived uninjured, but George Washington was watching from a nearby hill, and he affectionately nicknamed them his old line, and he used their story throughout their story of sacrifice to rally troops and patriots throughout the war. 19th century historian Thomas Field actually later called the battle an hour more precious to American liberty than any other. And it's actually why Maryland is now called the Old Line State. So thank you all for sharing a precious hour with us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.